Hello, and welcome to Chapter 20, Get Instant Cleverness.
Human Analog version 3.4, reporting in. I am ready to learn about using rhetorical devices and figurative language to make myself seem smarter and appeal to my audience.
Here we have the précis for this chapter, which you can pause the video here and read.
Or, they could simply read the copy they have on their handout.
Yes, or they could do that. Thank you so much for your input.
Oh, I believe that was an example of one of your rhetorical devices. Coyness.
You're absolutely correct. Coyness is when you say something without really meaning it, like what I just said, or, for example, when you get a scratchy, awful sweater for Christmas and you say, "Oh, you shouldn't have."
Affirmative. However, I do not see the issue with scratchy sweaters.
Fashion lessons are later, Android.
That reminds me, did I tell you about this conversation I had earlier today?
No, but if you did do that, that would be a prime example of dialogue.
You mean recounting a previous interaction counts as another of your rhetoric devices?
Sure does. You can use it to show how you see another person or to give a quick summary of a previous important event.
But, there was this broad who was.
And you've already used another device. This time, it's a speak around, which is when you substitute a description for the proper name. Now, before we go any further, we should talk about the main three categories of figurative language: figures of speech, figures of thought, and tropes.
Figures of speech change ordinary language through various techniques. Some familiar examples would be anaphora and alliteration.
That was some mild alliteration right there.
Another example that might not be as familiar is multiple yoking. Yoking. What is yoking?
Well, in the traditional sense, yoking is when you hook up a yoke, which is a farm tool, to your oxen or cattle in preparation for work. Here, multiple yoking is when one verb serves multiple nouns, or one verb is hooked up with multiple nouns. You can use them to overwhelm an opponent, and they are popular with sportscasters. Ain't that just the best thing since sliced bread?
I apologize, but I do not find bread as amazing as you do.
No, no, silly. That's an idiom. Probably one of the most famous figures of speech. It's when a collection of words have a different meaning than their dictionary or given one. Everyone uses these in daily life, usually without even noticing.
So if I say, wow, that sure is the antelope's ankles, I am using an idiom.
Not quite, Android. Idioms are usually not just created on the spot like that. They are the result of years of regional, cultural, and religious differences across the world manifesting themselves in our language. Now, if you hold your horses, you can learn a lot of them.
Since I see no horses, I'm going to assume that was another idiom.
You bet your britches.
I'm not sure that I will ever get the hang of this.
Aw, don't give up. Let's go on to the next category, figures of thought. These are logical or emotional tactics that are used to persuade. Some examples include concession and finding an attractive flaw. In fact, many of the tactics discussed in other chapters in this book fall under this category. Perhaps one of the most familiar examples is the rhetorical question. Pretty exciting, right?
As a mere facsimile of humanity, it is impossible for me to truly experience human emotions such as excitement.
It was a rhetorical question.
Oh,
Is asking a rhetorical question and answering it yourself a device? Yes, yes it is. That's called a hypophora. What do we want? Well thought out arguments. When do we want it? Now.
before we start a riot, I would like to be educated on the third and final part of figurative language, please.
Oh, yeah, of course. Tropes. A trope is when you swap an image or a concept for a different one. In essence, a trope is a carousel of meanings.
Something tells me you just used a type of trope.
Ding, 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 we have a winner. Please welcome metaphor to the stage. Metaphors like to make one thing stand for another, therefore swapping the representation.
I see. Related to this is the simile, which is when you compare things using like or as.
Well, aren't you just the greatest teacher ever?
As I am not yet fully informed on all of the facets of the English language, I doubt that is an accurate statement.
Of course, I was using sarcasm.
But you just said a sentence of standard construction.
Sarcasm, my friend, is when you use a specific tone of voice to flip the meaning of what you say. It's technically called verbal irony, and actually, any form of irony counts as a trope, including situational and dramatic, since irony is all about unexpected changes. If you want to know more, go ask your local library.
Why would I ask a building anything?
Well, you could, but you probably wouldn't get an answer. However, I was using the library as a metonym, another type of trope. A metonym is when you use a part to describe a whole. If you want to go back to swapping theme, you swap the part for the whole. You could also use an associated term, but swapping the part from the whole is much catchier. In this case, the physical library building is being swapped with the entire system of staff and books, which is staff and books are probably what you're going to be asking if you have a question.
So you are saying that it is another example of human laziness?
Keep talking like that and I'll have to put you down for insurrection, android.
If my science fiction database is accurate, then you will not succeed.
No, see, we'll save the day, but just in the nick of time.
Now that is a phrase that I understand.
That's probably because it's cliche and you've heard it a billion times.
Cliché, that descriptor has a negative connotation, yes?
Correct. When something is considered cliche, that means it's overused and boring. However, you can use a cliche idiom to your advantage. If your opponent uses one, you can twist it around by giving it a surprise ending or putting it in a different context. Heck, you can even bring your own cliche idioms to twist. That's not even the only way. You could give a cliche idiom new life by taking it literally, which lets you contradict your opponent while agreeing with him at the same time, and it makes most cliches completely absurd.
All clichés are absurd.
Well, thank you for your 2 cents on the matter.
But I did not gift you any amount of currency.
Oh, for goodness. Are you a hassle because I hate you, or do I hate you because you're a hassle?
I lack human intuition, yet something akin to it tells me that you just displayed another example of a trope.
Wow, you really are learning. That was an albeit slightly poor example of a chiasmus. Probably the most fun word in this lesson, perhaps the entire book. A chiasmus is when you present a mirror image of an argument, essentially of abutting an opposing point by playing it backwards. It can also be used for comedic effect via puns, which helps win the audience over to your side.
Yes, you do enjoy puns.
Well, you're either a pun lover or a pun hater.
I do not believe the world is divided up so cleanly.
Well, if you're using dialysis, it is.
You are just using terms left and right, aren't you?
I am as well versed as a high schooler can be, that is, in all the terms of this chapter. Ah, just slipped another one in. This time it's not a trope, but a figure of thought. The edit yourself aloud device. It makes you seem more real to the audience. Thus, they trust what you say more and trust that you're going to be more fair.
As a robot, I fear that no one will trust me.
Trust you? No. Listen to you? Yes.
You just changed the subject.
Boom. No yes statement right there. You repeat the opponent's words with no attached and add your own yes portion. This lets you easily redefine an issue in an instant.
That is impressive.
Now you just need to turn the audience down with some lightities. Then you can turn them back up with climax. I call this strategy tonification.
Is this a transition?
Welcome to Weirding Words! This is when you change nouns to verbs, verbs to nouns, and nouns to adjectives. Verbing is really the more official term, but oh well. Why this is not technically grammatically correct, it can definitely freshen things up. But, as always, with great power comes great responsibility, and if you're not careful, it can distract your audience. Like, if you want them to, listen, you still need to make sure that, you're understandable and all.
That was an uncharacteristically poor speech pattern.
Never fear, for it was on purpose as an example of pericon, a word that gets stripped of its meaning and used as filler. However, if used properly, even the unpopular use of like can have its uses. Even meaningless words can have meaning.
I believe the word for that is poetic.
Before we start waxing philosophical here, let's wrap up with some final thoughts. Don't worry if while you're writing a verbal argument it doesn't sound as great on paper as it does in your head. Things like these always sound better aloud than written.
I wish that was true of my program text.
Be quiet and stop breaking the fourth wall. You should use what sounds best to you and what you are most confident doing. In fact, we use many of these terms without even thinking about it every single day. So you shouldn't fret about doing it in a more formal setting. Can you send us off Human Analog version 3.4?
Now that you are educated and aware of all of these techniques, you will start to notice them more and more in your everyday life, and start to freshen your own language with them, perhaps without even realizing it, making you sound instantly more clever.